sentient beings.
Ta dikson genla.
Oh yeah. Oh, ne ta ka so ta. Oh de. Oh, kan shi su shi song ba yi ken da ten ba la na me. Ya wa te jin je ba ren ju su shi ton ba te lan de. Oh, de ka so de. Sim je tam je ge ten do. Ya sim je tam je ge ten tru tung ge ge. Sa je je ko ban to be che do. Ane che de nyen ge yin sam ku lo se tam ne sen gu ra. Sam ba shu se. Oh yeah. Tiene ka so de. Mal. Oh, tiene kulo ka nga zo se tam ne. Simje tam je ge ten tru tung ge ge. Sa je je ko ban to ba che ne. De che do che nyen ge yu sam. Oh, tiene kulo sam lo ta ya de ge. Pe pen che bu yo de ba. Nga ran zo de shida pen sa ayu sam sa chen ge yo de. Nga zo chun ju na le song ge do wa. Pen bar sam ba sam je chang se. Xian le ya pen bar sam ba sam je chang se do wa. Sim je ge ten tru tung ge ge. Pen bar tru tung ge ge. San je je ko ba to ba sho sam sa ge. Pen sim sam ke ba yin na song ge do wa. Pen bar sam ba sam je chang se. San je chu le ke pa na se. Ane san je shingam bumdra saya mang bo le ra. Shingam jiden ye kampe saya mang bo le ya. Ane Rinpoche na ting la so wa tin ge san je le cheba piwa le. Ti sunam chewa yin song ge do wa. Ti ting je ke ben do le song ba re se wa ra. San je chu le ke pa na se. Nga ra zo te cha chumbi de shibu che na te pen chumbi shibu che da yo ra wa me. Te le ya sim je ge te tam je le pen tong ge ki mi chin ju ra sho sam sa. Tin de kyen kun se yin de ka sa chin ju ra sho sam sa sam lo ta na. Pe pen chumbi de te yo ra. Sim je ning du pe ge pel ge yo ra. O te de san je che le ke pa na se. Sim je ma lu tam je ke se ra. Sim je sama tam je ge. Ten trup tung ge se yo ra. Sim je ma lu tam je ge. Te che do nge san je ko ba to bar cha ge yin sam sim che ma ma yin ba ke. Te che do ane chi ba chu tum so ba la so ba la le ngo su tar ge de la. Pe ye ba do me ba yo ba de me chi ko de me ko ma re se ra. Ra pe ba re sam ba sam je chang as. San je che le ke pa na ke ba de pa re. Sim je ma lu tam je ge se. Te te se te te do ngo su chu ba te la. Pen ye chen bu ten de ju wa me chi ko song ge do wa. Oh ya te chi la na.
So, to begin with, to he who saw and taught dependent origination, I bow to that teacher who explains that seeing, what he has understood to others. So here we need to give rise first to the proper kind of motivation for listening to the teachings. Really, we should be setting a motivation thinking this is for the sake of all sentient beings. May I myself be able to become a being who is able to benefit all sentient beings. So really giving rise to that intention, that kind of motivation is something that is incredibly powerful. As Shantideva has said in his Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, that even just to the wish to benefit other sentient beings is superior to making like grand offerings to many Buddha fields. So here, even if we were to imagine like realms, all kinds of realms filled with the seven precious items, filled with jewels and so forth, making that kind of extensive offering to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas is surpassed by this intention to be of benefit to others. This is also described in a verse from the King of Concentration Sutra, where it says that making great offerings to the Buddha, this kind of extensive offerings of realms filled with jewels and so forth, is surpassed by the kind of thought of wishing to be of benefit to others. So here, when we give rise to that kind of attitude, wherein we wish, even if it's just a wish, to be able to become the kind of being who has eliminated all faults and developed all good qualities, that alone increases our kind of strength of mind, our conviction. And when we have this thought that for all beings without exception, may I be able to become of benefit to them, may I be of help to them, to think of that in a kind of unfabricated, contrived sort of way, that is something that what need is there to speak of the benefits if a wish to benefit other sentient beings itself surpasses such an extensive grand offering to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas? A being who genuinely wishes to benefit others all without exception and thereby engages in the six perfections, generosity and ethics and so forth, pursuing that goal, what need is there to speak of the kind of benefit that comes from such activity? So, here, reflecting on the fact that such an intention, such an attitude is far superior to even extensive offerings to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, we should take care to set a proper kind of intention for listening to the teachings.
Oh yeah, this is Cookie me do. Oh yeah. Oh, thing do Karsore. Ngarajo Pena. Kaskan you pet about Sayo Mambuja Swa, me Mambushi Swa. A Kanga Molam Dreka. Never to the young Yoga Tragata. And it's Tungan get to the Shisange to the Lake Jawa Sambolaya, the Tender Molam Captain de Chera, Kasakali Chikidoa. And I did the Vala Molam Captain de Cheswa. Oh, tea do Karsore. There's a pengi order. Sona Mambusa order. Oh, tea do. Razo Sayum de Capde Conjoy never. Ches Yomara Koran Sui Sebeke Marwa. They chinted direction the time. Samagatelia. Ninche Samsa, Tungeda China, some Kange or Samsa, Roboche, Kangape, Harubaru Chidoa, Kasakane. Natile Dua Chilagarazo, me Sogodoa. Juma never came out and Garazo Garanzo Soya or the Tile Dua Chera. Me Bumdra Mambo say or the Pu Chunju Pama from Sange, Lete or the Tungusum do Tonde Yora. Tingarazo Tanda me Chinga Sir Wako. Sachu Melon Juma could never chase and Garazo serve my again. Tinde Chunga Maroa. A Tesoya son, Tilia. A Tinde Kabli and Garazo Kanga Karsura. The Agumaris and Menase. Tunganya subject to Tungeda China Samsa. Kulu Samlutan, which Pendo Che at the Samlutan Kudoa. The Agumare Kange Chonsha Chichese. The Zungan to Temote, dead about Shiraka Chimara. Chichi Chigi Mama Chigas, say to good to me. Chida Tondra Mambo say to Chichese. Sentende Karsura. Kitile Jansen Pambashira. Juago never shown the Chias your mother. Garazul never your mother. And then never showed you Ganzu Shirage. Don't you saw Yam Yam Shage, Pessim de Che, Roboshidoa. A Timmy Marazo made shade to Serne. Marazo Lava Yobate, teacher and Atilia Tanda. Oh, they shall some Zakachi to which on a Kayo mother. Consul Delico Samsa Samlacor Gavara. Or Tipe Jobora, some Joboshirare. He did in Decabla, Samlia Wataja Casa, Pensum Chayata. Oh, Tinde Case Boreto. Yeah, teach Lamna.
So, here, therefore, this kind of an attitude is something very important to train in. We recently in Tibet, there was an earthquake. And there was much suffering that was caused by this earthquake. We see all over that there are those making prayers for those who are injured and harmed to be quickly healed, and those who have died to take good rebirths and so forth. Even here at our center, we have been making prayers for that. And this is something where it's maybe easy for us to give rise to compassion because it is a disturbance of the elements. I mean, an earthquake is a natural disaster wherein these kinds of harms and difficulties occur, but it's not as though anyone did it, anyone caused it, but rather it's just the way of things. It is the nature of our world that there are going to be those kinds of natural disasters. But when we think about it, the kinds of harm that are done by humans to other humans are actually much worse than even these kinds of natural disasters. So we have this sense. I mean, it's easy for us to look at that kind of situation of like an earthquake and feel a kind of compassion for other sentient beings and wish that they be freed from their sufferings, that their sufferings be quickly ended. But often, when it comes to the kinds of sufferings that humans create for one another, we see that if we really look around the world, there are those doing harm, killing hundreds, thousands, and so forth. And we kind of tend to sit here like we're just watching a movie, like that's happening somewhere else. But really, that should make us feel quite depressed looking at what humans do to one another. So, what we have done, what we as humans do to one another, is we shouldn't look at it as, well, whatever happens, happens. But training our minds in a beneficial attitude has a benefit. There is a benefit in trying to eliminate those kinds of thoughts of wanting to harm others and training in compassion and love. And here, it's not just in those cases of natural disasters, but even for those situations where we as humans are the cause. Dixon.
Oh yeah. Undimenta, disere. Oh yeah, tende kalsora. Ka. Oh, tende ngazu kalsora. Oh, chenye du ina kadu ina da samba che. Kulo chuya tepe. Geshimbre doa tende. Simje tamje ge tendo. Simje tamje ge tendo trup tum genge. Kyo kunse yende kunde ji kibushin juar cha asam. Te che do kyo se da. Yende truye ge che do. Chenar karison yina. Ti nyenje nge. Tele samlutan, tele kumdi cheche. Yamli chigi yin samsa. Kulo se tamne sembar shu se. Oh, te chilap. Hendigde.
So, whether we are listening to Dharma or doing any other activity, it's really important that we train our minds in this kind of attitude, develop that wish to become a fully enlightened Buddha, wherein we have the ability to help others. So, really, the Dharma is about finding ways to train our mind, to develop those kinds of good qualities and eliminate our faults, and thereby habituating our mind to whatever kind of learning, whatever sort of trainings we have learned is really what the essence of the Dharma is. So we should set our motivation thinking, I'm listening to these teachings that I'm going to put into practice, habituate my mind to, in order to be able to become a fully enlightened Buddha for the benefit of all other sentient beings.
Oh yeah. I'm going to do this one. Okay, sir. That's Siba Colotelia. They tar Trami, Shuni Nang Yube, Piri Nam Jesida. Tadelia, Netic, in the Kagache, Chuni Seshara. Then the Yala Chuni de Co, Chanjik Remu, the Trami Chuni Seshara, Tatadelia. This is Mendawa, the datos or the Tramita Zunalia, Tome Marigua Sanjay, Niban Duchi, Sumbanam City, Sanjelia, Tata Delia, Kagakaga Juni Social de Segura. Mendawa, Pado Tenicas, Draw Mendawa, Mendawa Tetato, Nyawayita, Tundrumi, Lama, La Soba, Draw Tetato, Kiva Segura. Simje Kene, Netinea, Shidro, La Soba, Kene. Shive Bato, no? Today, ne young Joane. Oh, Tindetine Joachine, she to Kudu Tende Yala Juni, you gonna quite get or that's Yeshi. Jenandro de Yara, oh, Tiesgora. And Joane, Dogbaranju, get Chibabo, Shen, Sushi, Rawange, Cordo Chuba, my English. Angarazo Meda Lada Lama Yela Soba Tezo Yawa Sangeda Lonju Chijun da Tunge Chijun La Soba Tezo Sama Sigora. Oh Chebabo Juden Dangbechu Nashana Juden Chebabo Shandachi Sune Di Samlutane and Titi Nazuli Juma Mare Sigora. The Karjan Juarisana oh Ti 소소그 도매 마릭바 쳔네 티레벤 저사네 ane tende chene ane dwa rima dawala jawala gyore siti hakuya tandal she yore chera takwa ranjung ge cheba bo shen sushi ge kya rawa yunge chi ge cheba bo chi yu tiga su yo mare se kwa kor chu yo mare tungen jingi yo mare tewa chi te yo mare se ma yingi so na kares na simcha rang ge le da nyomo ba le chidar korwe chu se simcha rang ge tambo thome mari ba che nga sam nga rawa sam la ta etene le sa o tinde chene ne do ri me da tinde che khurgi war ta se te so le sa nge ge wa ge sam la ta da ko sum je shoba sa nge ge wa ge ane te tu te yong ge war ta se pena nga ra zo che de la ya so sam la ta jo ya sam bu da nge ba lunga ye so ge shoba sa nge le te ne lunga ye som ge le ga che ra sembi semba samluta ane che lunga jawa sambu che ne sambu yong ngemba che ne ngemba yong tende thoya yo ra o dine shire le sidu sa shenda jil ku ju yo mara ngara zu che de le sa de do jawa sambu chi to le samluta na semba sigra jawa ngemba che tende samluta ge na ti sembe le sigora ele tene ne kane ke je sambu she ku na ngemba she ku na lunga nam ju ten ku na le sa yo ra ila tene ne debu yang ni ka ga yo yo ra ka she ga zu chen de lo ngu sum de tu ye yo ra o tin de wang yo yo re se wa shen che ba bo chi yo ma re se wa ra ko de chu ba yin ge se ma yin ge sem je ra ge le da nyam mo ba ra ge ka she su shi ge ja ra wang ge ko de chu ba ma yin ge sem je ra ge le da nyam mo ba chi da ra ko re chu o ra ge le sang le tene ene ko kor ge war da se chu te je deber jo ya la chu ni ji ko ne ko we chu chumbar che ba yin no se o te ten de ya la chu ni ji chami chu ni yo ba te na ne ten de ya la chu ni chun je she ya de ji den je che ba bo nga zo ke wa sang he da ti du nyo ye de kar chen yong go re se na tin ji den ge che ba bo shen da ji ra wa ge che ge yo mar da se te so ge sam le ta jo da ene lunga ge che ba jo nga ma da chen de da te zo ge sang he le te ne ene yong go re se o ti she che du song go re che re o ya
Mm. So here then, turning to the text, we are on page 93, beginning in the middle where it says, the drawings in the ring of 12 images surrounding the 5 realms illustrate how the living beings of various types are born, transit to other lives, and after transitioning, take rebirth. So here in the Wheel of Life, this representation, visual representation, there are 12 sort of separate sections around the outside that represent thereby the kind of process of the 12 links of dependent origination, whereby various types of beings, so again, hell beings, hungry ghosts, animals, humans, and then we can divide into demigods and gods, those 5 or 6 types of beings which are in the inner circle. It is then by way of the 12 links that they take rebirth. And so here it explains that this illustrates how a permanent self-existent creator deity does not make them cycle. So rather, living beings cycle due to their own karma and afflictions. So it isn't as though rebirths, good and bad rebirths, or the kind of amount of possessions that we have, or the lack of things that we have, or suffering and happiness, those are not due to a creator, but rather all of this comes from our own ignorance. First, that initial ignorance that then causes us to create various actions and so forth, which in turn leads to the rest of those 12 links. It isn't as though there is some kind of creator deity who has the power to put us in samsara or give us happiness and suffering, create a bad or a good rebirth, but rather it is due to this process of the 12 links of dependent origination, beginning with that initial ignorance that causes an individual to create karmas, good and bad karmas, through the various actions of body, speech, and mind. So there are times when we can see that an action that is performed in this life leads to ripening results that we can see in this very life. But often it's the kind of ripening results of actions that we created in our previous life. So it is then, we can see that our karma is really not just the kind of external actions, but also the intention. When we have the kind of thought to say something, when we have the thought to move in a particular way, that too is creating karma, intentional karma, and then the karma that is intended, the actions that follow through that. So whenever we have that kind of creation of karma, it is going to lead to the ripening of a particular result. Again, some are directly experienced in this life, but it is only due to our own karma, our own actions, that we have various experiences. So our good and bad rebirth, the kind of suffering and happiness that we experience in this life, it isn't due to our having been given that, or sort of that being created by some other factor other than our own karma, that we have accumulated in this life as well as previous lives. So it says again, rather, living beings cycle due to their own karma and afflictions, passing through cyclic existence by means of the 12 factors of dependent arising. This negates there being some sort of creator or other being who is giving this to us. It's all our own creation.
Oh yeah. That's how they said it. Oh yeah. 다들 중이데 바제 천재 때데 알아 중이 거네. 중이데 천재데 셰거도 와. 르문데게 대충거를 르문데게 대충거를 셰게 와라. 다 당보대로 와. 잠이 당보 되는 고추그라 하네 두 바제 중이 와라. 개모 로아 커줄라 템베 비리게세. 겐고 아마치 테네 커주지 수체 로아체 미마도 저도 되게 시키셔라. 당보들야. 디 빼 르무테게서 와라 비리세 빼 르무테게세. 로아 ring에서 로알라 ring아요라 냐와이다 전도 미라세. 이 ring아. 로아 ring에 코라 깨와 펜체게 레 꾸네 로아르체베 레 당부야 깨충게데 마르바데 nga 삼사 나의 내주 마르바세오라 나의 내주 친질로도 렉바들 마르바시고라 오네데 마르바소자 다가 내주 오네데 마르바체 친질로도 렉바소자네 마르바세오라 이제 친질로도 렉이오라 내가서 개mol로아 카줄라 템베 피리키 스페이스 못되게 로아르 네 코아르 껴와 펜제지 레꾸네 로아르체베 nga rawe loarechebe rawe ngada ngayirjam nga singeje rawa chiyo bajem baro ane ngai se ne ngai ne ngelu ngeloju nge namisera ane ngai was nge mi ngai na was ngai was gora jembe ngao nyambe taage nelo chishi marikbe thome marikbade chubayenos 이 도매 말이보다 챙겨와서 깨모 농아 가지고라 때마다 아니 내 중원에 말이 버셔고 야안로네 누구여라 어떻게 가르친 것이나 도매 말이보다 왕도 소안네 디시 당부디 다게 내주 말이보다 다게 내주 친질로도 삼로 거라 되게 괜찮네는 고트네 저거 거에 싸워대 되래서라 야
So then we get into an explanation of what each image illustrates or represents. So each of these images is going to represent one of the 12 factors of dependent arising, beginning with the first image of a blind old woman leaning on a walking passage and then we'll go through it. This illustrates the initial ignorance of not knowing precisely the nature of the self, thinking I, apprehending an independent I and an independent mine. This ignorance acts as a motivating force for the karma that projects a birth as one of the 5 types of beings. So here again, when one takes birth as one of the 5 types of beings, a hell being, a hungry ghost, an animal, a human, or a god, this is due to karma, and that karma is initially motivated by this fundamental ignorance or this initial ignorance, and it is an ignorance of the way that things are, as it says here, an ignorance of not knowing precisely the nature of the self. This ignorance holds the I to be somehow like independent or autonomous, and then holds the mine as well to be somehow independent, this kind of independent mind. And that ignorance in turn, this lack of knowledge, then a lack of knowledge or misknowledge regarding the way that things are, it is mistaken with respect to the nature of the self. And so it is then due to the force of this karma that one the force this ignorance acts as the motivating force. So ignorance in turn is what causes karma, which in turn projects a rebirth as one of the 5 types of beings. And this is illustrated by this kind of blind old woman who is leaning on a walking stick, and that represents the way in which this fundamental ignorance is mistaken with respect to the nature of phenomena, particularly the self.
Oh yeah. Oh teacher. But then I do the Namjunga. Ameba Tongbani said the Shagora to do Tommy Maru by the map so at Tondalia. Oh, to the Koyats all so at Tondal. Oh, did it to do Narazu Mili Kajeshedu, Tanya Giwangi Shagba Maimba, Luda Sem Nilera, Lugit, Luda, Sem da Shibalia, Dramanda Mamboyordo, so Dushi Sembanga Je Kondonga Je Trato Mamboyora. Tesula Tene. Ane taa se titu nyongen taa chipa mi ba misne da roa trashi tundu se rang pa ming ta gyora o te wang ge shaba ma to korang ngene chu ling chi yo ma re se she gyora nga ju ko da te ti te do a ena ti nga ra ju sem gi kyo le ngun zin to ba che gora penan di tome ma re ba de tundu yan che le yor ba sim je tundu yan che to chang ma le yora 근데 대sol을 가지고 가서라 탄년제 왕의 샤바 유랑원의 제제던데 삼을게 고야요 말아 된다디 가르코고서는 가스데 속보다 심레 로스여 버서 가스 직랭랭더지 삼을코고도 안 남지 로해제가 나랴 가스 르다 심레 로스여 버서야 다들 다음에 타라만 보용구라 Luda Simle Loso Yobarachi, Samlo Kogoda, Pumbule Tension Barachi. The Kandarata, losing a Simpsanga, the Logarichi, lost Chiyobachi, Samlo Kogoda, Ramachi. Lindas Kogoda, or Tire. Tindachi Yoma Resigora, and the Carresida. Titu Yongage Yority, Luda Simla Tenepatane. Roa. Ne Luji Chawata, Simke Samlutan, Kosamlutan de Kogodo, Lesagato, Condosesha. ene taa de drogo dege to soche to machimba to ro mise to se shago ro o tende je pa wangi pa shago ro ma to yu rangu ne yo ma re se ti ro ling da chi do atunda na su do leje na lia nge so bo che chik so so lo so ye ba re do tende je yo ma ro yene kasine shi nga zo mili shede Zene Pumbo Naldo Kawando Sene, Ragumedusa Samlutan, me in a sometime in the Yora. Oti in the Sosa Nanjing and Jesse the end, I'm just Samlutan, the Deji Kogi day inside Samsung Munziche Togura. Nanzide. Then I thought it was actually Lutan Samlutan, the Tangachi Pa, Lu Taya Chidoa. Ya Pa Tamagocha, so ling letters, two chick, you ever Samluchidua. O tillisayora, tinga zungunzi tokura. Tome marik basido nga samlu tindesi kogu dire do asam. Ta tiwange ene ngaye ngalachi se kanga yongora. Tinde mare nga sayade ludan samla pa tende takba samla shagore sana. Taking Emma Lingley, some local dead, Dagame Doa. Oh, teach Kesambura. So sweet you let Tommy Mariba and D. Samara, D. Samara Cadres, Samsa. Don't do Angela Yoga, Consul, some local day or Samsa. Teaching Gunzito Shagura. Yeah, teach Lamna.
Mhm. So, here, normally, in the context of talking about this initial ignorance, we also discuss emptiness, selflessness. In order to be able to eliminate that kind of initial ignorance, we have to have a realization of the lack of such a self as we normally grasp it to exist. So it seems to us, not just to us as humans, but to all sentient beings, there is in our innate mind a sense that there is some kind of a self that is like really concretely, autonomously, independently there, other than apart from the body and the mind. It doesn't seem to us in our normal course of events that, oh, this self that I feel or this feeling of an I is just something that is merely nominally existent. But rather we have a sense that there seems, I mean, and this is again, not just human beings, but all sentient beings, even animals in their innate mind. It seems as though there's like a solid, concrete kind of an I that's there, something that is somehow apart from the aggregates, that is somehow like solid and concrete and autonomous. And so here, this is something that is very important for us to be able to identify in our own continuum, in our own mind, be able to look at and see, this is how I am grasping the mind. So here, when we think about it, when we sort of have in our innate mind, there is this sense that there's an I that's like there, it's concrete, it's real. But when we begin to investigate and analyze, we can see that the I or the self is something which is merely designated on the body and the mind, the various kinds of minds too. We have all sorts of different minds, anger and jealousy and desire and so forth. It's not as though the self, the I, is either the body or the mind, but when someone does something like, oh, Tashi stole or Tashi lied or something, we can say that that person did that thing because it is a mere dependent designation, independence upon those aggregates and the actions done by those aggregates. We can say, oh, this person did that thing. But to our innate mind, it seems as though there is this like solid real I. And this is something that it is very important for us to be able to identify, to look at the way in which our innate mind has this sense of an I. And when we come to be able to
Oh, yeah.
identify that and have a sort of understanding of what it is to be merely nominally existent, if we understand the I is merely nominally existent, that negates, that gets rid of that sense of there being a concrete, solid kind of an I. Again.
Oh, yeah.
Just-
Doing Sarah. Oh, yeah, that day, Geshambuda, Namji. Senny Bozula Segura. Changja Reveto, Songi, one Namjunga, the Giri, Changja Reveto said. Inal Giora. In the Rari, Losenga, she said. Angarazo, Pechatangesul Segura. Lodro Sevato, Pechatangesul Segura. In the Rari, Losenga, she said. Tutup, Da said, Da me said, Tuktuba. Rawa, Siorwa. Tutup, and Badruba said. There's a chicken ten his order. Tutup, Tindru, so Talashin, a Tasdi, Ming de la Sigora, de la Shane Sigora. Gauju Rajesh Soda. Pa Kaya de Rajo, you get a Shandaj cell de do Sigora. Or Tutu, Tambadu, Rawan to a Shandaj said de do Sora. Tutu Tindru, so Talashin. Gauju de Pa Kasha, Tambadruba said Tas Kaya de Rajo, you Rago, you get a chick sings Shandaj, you have some local do Sigara. Gauju Rajesh Sodas. Any car. Today, Amai, Tatombani, Mona Todo Sansura. Today, Amai, she retinase. Langla Lin de Yoga Mendoza. Langla Lin of some Chicodonga, so the chi. So what I send the Tosodan Del Megovisaco, Lin de Nabu some local days to her. O Tindres Tombani, one to Latin, you have a catch a Mendoza, Segura. Tunda, 소소 남주 삼로다 여대게 나서 링이 와라 치 삼로 코도와 링링답치 속도가 코라 로스 기업에서라 라완천 예배서라 삼코다 어디 야고지 소소 남주 난진디 은진체네 이 삼로 땅원 난진디 랑자샤 셴다 엠바드로바 라와드 드로바스도 라고 연결을 셴다 그 세요 말했어도 어디에 개첨부도 야
So, again, this is something that is really important, as the great master Changyal Rinpoche Dorje has described in his poem, Recognizing the Mother, talking about emptiness. It is the case that sometimes those who think of themselves as scholarly or as very erudite have this idea that they sort of leave alone. Although they are kind of attached to or cling to these notions of things as being truly existent or existent from their own side, rather than identifying that in terms of the way it appears to our innate mind, they're searching for some kind of true existence that is like something with horns, that is something out over there. So it really here what he is saying is that rather than identifying the way in which this I appears as something like solid and concrete, something that is existent from its own side in the way that it appears to our innate kind of mind. This type of sort of faulty practitioner leaves that aside and goes searching out for something else that they think of as being true existence, that is like something sort of monstrous with horns or something. So it's very important that when we as practitioners are looking for this kind of innate sense of an I, that we don't disregard that sort of solid, concrete sense of an I and go searching out for something else that we think is true existence. But rather, we need to be connecting with our own innate way of seeing things, not sort of searching for some other referent of this term. Dig
Oh, yeah.
Songkin.
This one. 어디 인도 때 야보 삼로 땅고에 개첨부도 내가 가져 단다 나라저 로렌지 날이야 가져 삼로 거기도 나라 야보를 지중에나 가져 딘데컵을 또서 난진데 세부 용거라 야보를 시베 존나 가다라시라 당아야 보셔 야 신하를 지중에 지버를 지중에시 신하를 시베 존나 나삼사 삼로 거기도 남주네도 삼로 단다다 가서도 삼로 코로나 신경 아시요나 딩아드요나 tinde치요나 아니 티 르다 켄 델고 메도아 셈다 켄 델고 메도아 코로나 로가제 도아 이라도 도바르 레데도아 어티 인데 코 tin데디 라라 링링세 나저 남주 삼로 코 데게 티나네 마치 동반이 다음에 봤을 때네 알랭에 남주 삼로 tin데 코티 요사 마레 아삼사 나세 tin데 요 마레 이나가라 통마마 콤베와게 티 삼로 코데 요레 삼사지 문지지 토고도 이 매네 소소 나가 삼사 삼로 땅에 들은 저와치 매버치네 나지다 담베셰다네 게티스 캔도 시라요 마라 어티 인데코 소소 삼로 땅 나지세 컨데시도 티 삼로 땅에 문지 토고에 개쳐보라 이 나네 땅하에 세데 때네 따고삼 풍부할 때네 봐따 봐참 르르기 차셰 가야 말에 셈지 차셰 가 시베 차셰 가야 말에 니일 때네 대다가 자와치는데 다가 자와치기도 냠바치기도 대화용고 동행용고 세 샤고 그래 텐데지 마토지게 이 코랑은에 라완도 전에 개면도 풍부할 땐 타녀기 왕게 바치 샤네 에네가도 대기 대화용고 동행용고 스인데 샤고에도 어떤데 소소소 삼로도 스타트네 아보요라 진득바체 도매 말이 받아 계신부터 될 때는 간가 용거라 내가 예스라와 지체 내가 저서체 내 신체 다초 신조체 내 차다 와 카셰를 뭐 카셰 bel하고도 셈슈도에 카셰 telem metin bal바 타와시에 착바디 기도 대체라 나 삼사랑 나되는 나의 삼사가 삼사 착바디 기와라 Chakba yuji yu sadhusan tela koya teta chakba ta shenda mambuchi ta teta neba shenge ta mitimbo la kondro saya yungudwa. Chakdang ke wange ene le sa tudu ta koa jeji le mato saya yomara. Chakba wange kewe le sa na koa kogure. Chakba ta tangwe wange mikiwe le sa na koa kogyora, koa kochik le redugora. Ya wati chilap. Tendi bosha.
So, thinking about this is something that is extremely important to be able to identify that sense of an I in our innate mind is something that really is crucial for us to do to really have this practice be effective. So, for example, when something good happens to us, we can more easily identify this kind of sense of I. Like we have this thought of like, oh, something good happened to me. Or when we are really afraid, when we have some sort of experience of fear or trepidation, there's also a sense of I that comes up, this like wanting to protect this I. And so, in those kinds of moments, we need to investigate if there were an I, such as it appeared to me, it wouldn't be like possible. I mean, in those cases of where we are identifying with a particular state of mind, then the I wouldn't be connected with the body at all. And so we have to identify this within our own innate kind of thinking, our normal way of thinking, and come to recognize that that is erroneous, that we are mistaken with respect to the way in which we perceive this I to exist. But instead, if we unconnected with our actual experience or what is happening within our innate mind, we go searching for some sort of philosophical concept or thing that is this I to try to negate, that's not going to be of any benefit. So, here, when we are looking at our body and mind, which are the basis upon which this I is designated, we can't find the I to be any part of the body or the mind. But yet, when we do actions or we have various thoughts, we can say, oh, I think this or I am doing that, because that I is a mere designation on that basis, designated by thought and convention. And so, if we are able to really contemplate on this and actually identify that innate grasping, we have various thoughts, we can say, sorry, some feedback there. So here, this is something that is again, when we are able to contemplate the way in which our initial ignorance, then misperceiving this I, we then have a kind of attachment to the I and the mind. And this in turn then gives rise to attachment and aversion. We have a kind of attachment to our side. We want to protect that. We want to keep it from being harmed or damaged in any kind of a way. And we have an animosity toward that is considered to be other. We give rise to anger and hatred and so forth. And from that, we then engage in various actions and various karmas, which in turn can lead to nothing but rebirth within samsara. So it is through this initial ignorance that all of the rest of these links come to be. And by really identifying the way in which our innate mind grasps that I, this is critical for being able to dismantle that kind of initial ignorance.
Oh yeah. That is what that and that the koe tsawasinanda the yabuching to Chama yonsati tira. Tambungashi dala shenju chinse. And the dagin de sierra, chabashira, dagin is and it qua cogiora. Ah, send it dacho shensho. Nazu lumba sera, nazu chulu sera, ganga tiu yungura. Oh, the Kachimura, Tome Maruba, Koetsawa. Oh, the Yabuching Wenzi. Shirangwenzi Matuna, sometimes some Lushuchim, but so matter some Yubangeti, Yabure Mendoa, some Saturdays, some cotton and the so Bule, Pumbule, Tension Bangachi, Mendoa, some Saturdays, some cotton and the Abachibu Rawachi, Mendu, some Rawa, Ragbar, some cotton and the Ombanyes do Tara, Mambo Samlutan Yora. Oh, Tindech Samlutan Tati, Tome Maribase, Koyetsawase, oh, Ti Yala Chungi Shanda Kanga Panche, you had the teleton Yungi, but the Hakotoa. Oh, teach Tome Maripat into Sarata. Oh, teach you.
So then that initial ignorance is referred to as the root of samsara in the sense that
알레
it is
타기셔.
this first link that gives rise to all of the rest of them. Like we see in
나
Chandrakirti's
용매네
entry to the middle
타샤시.
way, it says then first holding to a thought of I and then mine, beings sort of go in this like water wheel of samsara. So we first have a thought of I as being like solid, really truly existent, and then mine, and then we think like my religion, my people, and so forth. And so here to be able to investigate this, and again there are many different levels of subtlety too in understanding of selflessness or emptiness. So whether we are contemplating that there can't be an I separate and apart from the aggregates, or whether there can't be an I that is permanent, unitary, and independent or autonomous, whatever level it is that we are thinking of, beginning by addressing that kind of initial ignorance, attacking that ignorance through recognizing that this is where all of the rest of the causes of samsara come from. This is the really crucial point for initial ignorance.
오야. 다 니바 자케 데로와. 다 니바 데르다. 통매 머리 봐시 티드버시. 다 니바 두지 일레드 셰요라. 레 손지디 셰요라 리무토네. 간도스 리무 가려서나 자케기 네 나서 집에 비리스도 자마송게 자마송게 지금 내제 마부 코딩다 보바단 라멘다 미다 직든데 라멘다 제모체 소야 되시거라. 인데 송게지 리무티샤라. 예페페 빼자니 셰거라 리무데 가르시거라스나 당지 마릭 배왕게세 다돈 zemba ngase rawa rangwene chi yoban zemba tiwange sora number sheba la leje pacha koar namshe sigara number sheba tela ene ta leje pacha koar che sigda ta le sa yora tome mari be kunelane leje pacha koar che 상해 치르베 고외께와 펜바르시베 니번 두지게 레드 선바이노스 어다치 자게되게 자게이네 가유수구이나 셰고수구이나 다멘다 수구로 왔네세 다멘다 소나시 토메 마리베 꾸네라네 삼로꾼로데 꾸네라네 에네다 레 다멘다 사그레 케벨레다 미케벨레다 로마데레 룽아게 쳬바 셈비 삼로타 상보다 녜바다 파르마 령하게 쳬발에 상보다 녜바 파르마셰 개와 메케와 로마데 레세데 사요라 지르베 코르 개와 펜제기 니번 두지기 레세 니번 레부 랍도 두치게게 니번 두지기 레사다데 이페데 토네 셰기오레스요라 오야 티치라.
So, second, then we have the image of a potter that illustrates conditioning factors or formative action, the second link of the 12 links of dependent origination. So, first, we have then that initial ignorance represented by the blind woman. And due to that ignorance, we then engage in a variety of actions. So, here, the second image is a potter creating a variety of pots. So this illustrates the second factor of dependent arising of conditioning factors or compositional activity, which has to do with our karma. So the power of the ignorance that apprehends a self plants certain karmic dispositions in the consciousness. So first we have that kind of ignorance, and due to the ignorance, we then engage in various actions in turn giving rise to positive, negative, neutral actions. So in the way like a potter, or a glass worker or anybody who's making a variety of things has a motivation and then creates something out of that. So too, due to the first link of ignorance, we then have the second link of conditioning factors or as it says here, compositional activity, wherein due to the power of that ignorance, we create various actions, and these conditioning factors then lay predispositions, kind of latencies on the consciousness, and these conditioning factors project rebirth in cyclic existence that are either favorable or unfavorable. So it is then the second link that is the action motivated by that initial ignorance.
Oh yeah. Then dira let the car course sit. Even do you let the chakbata down you get one make it less I order. So let chakbe one so don't that to get shadow. Tama chizu nga she napsin nesimla so make you a chew yoga. Oh, now control one get make it less I order. Chakbata. Shella Troata, Ada Tagi or a chak by Wangi, and then make it less asuna. And they got so that. Oh, Yawayita tenderly kitchen later and Guera. That country Wangi to give a less I Yomara. Rala chak by Wangi. Gara Yabuchena Maton Digmare, some Chiso Nali Abu Digmare, Yoachima Yabu Digmare, some Susulia, Shenjago Wangi. Pa Tama Pa Chizu Pa Mikiwa Chupa and the champagne is some Lukiwa Chu Trupsuna. The less asuna lunga less asuna. They'll have the military less of yada. So, yes, only kitchen lady, Chardani gave one Sayatoa. Then drop Miller kitchen lady, Contra one get a Saya Marte, Chakbe Wangi, and the less some with the Salvador. Night and the Shannon Digmare, some Sage. Or teach the Niba Duji Latilla, Sayate, Chagdangi on the Salvador. Oh, teach your cursor. Oh, this is Labna, don't get it. Mountain.
So here then the second link of formative actions. When we think about this, these are the kinds of actions, the karmas that we create that then in turn lead to a future rebirth. So when we have that initial ignorance, that then can lead to attachment and hatred or animosity. So when we engage in negative actions, negative karma can be motivated by either attachment or hatred or any of our other afflictions. And so we might engage in harsh speech, in divisive speech, in lying, in maliciousness, in covetousness, and so forth. The 10 non-virtues are motivated by one of those afflictions, either attachment or hatred or one of the others. And that in turn leads us to create karma, formative actions that will lead to rebirth in the lower realms as a hell being, a hungry ghost, or an animal. And it is, though, out of attachment that we can create virtuous actions. So when we create karma, it is going to lead to a further rebirth within samsara. But if we have created positive actions out of attachment to ourselves or our side and wanting good things for ourselves, say we do actions that are beneficial, we abandon the 10 non-virtues, for example, that kind of virtuous karma can lead to rebirth as a human or a god. So when it comes to our our negative actions, that can be motivated by either attachment or hatred or any of our other afflictions. But really, when it comes to our virtuous karma, this is normally motivated out of a kind of attachment, an attachment to the self, wanting good things. But in either case, it is leading to renewed rebirth within samsara.
Oh, yeah. I didn't Tameba. Musum do Tone, Chagdan Ponsona. There was Seba Panroa. Seba Ponsona, quite your mother. Then the less of a Yanako, less under quite getting later your mother. Tame Tomba you come, and that dancing the Musum do Toya come. Dancing Namjung and Zulu Langi Nalanga, Samsa, Nalingi was some listua. Tipe Mangecha. Then the Tewangi less I am ever chasuna, Chagdango less I am ever chasuna, Tipana Chagdan Pandora. Chagdango less I am at the quite getting less out to say your mother. Quite less I your mother. Seba made it and Nariko Toma Mabana Sasha Bele Yunaya, tell us certain getting Seba married, Keba Seba Kubel and Bakora. He made it. Don't do it and drew Sabu de Sally Yunaya Chumana. And the Sabu de Drepung Yomara, or Tina Shadura. Nemasa Shape Le Yuna Tezu Devu Mia Yomare. Karasa Lenji Chicken Seba de Stosarwa. Oti in the Tanga Shape Le to Nibamini Koake Tumare, Satu Savi Omare, Otene Tarwa Topsane. Otene Lesana ko. Gevele Sagi or Chimbatsu Seba Karasanaya. Koa Penjigale Regi Omara. Or teach Labna. Yeah.
So, by developing a direct realization of selflessness, one can counteract, one eliminates that kind of initial ignorance that grasps at there being a solid, concrete, real, truly existent kind of self. And once you have eliminated that kind of holding to a self, one is no longer then going to have the eighth and ninth factors of craving and grasping. So, when you eliminate that factor of craving that leads to the kind of ripening of the karmas that one has previously accumulated, again, once you have eliminated the sense of a self, of an I, that gets rid of that link of craving, which in turn leads to the ripening, the sort of nurturing of those previously accumulated karmic seeds, which leads to renewed rebirth. So, through having eliminated that, even though you might have previously accumulated karma, it can no longer ripen and bring results. It doesn't have the proper kind of coordinating condition of that craving and grasping to cause renewed rebirth. And thereby one achieves liberation. So once one has eliminated that, whatever kind of positive activities, engaging in the six perfections and generosity and ethics and so forth, are not creating karma that leads to renewed rebirth because one has eliminated the fundamental cause of that.
Oh, yeah. Then this one, then Lenny Wangi. Rachumber is Sasuna. Tanda Yebe Ludi Dorgerwa, Titor Sasunata. Let a Numabe Shawan to Kuni Pumbundo Leche Umaro. Now Lud of the Laya Yorite, Ilusigra. Yijirang Shinki Luse. So Rameban Dorgoba. Kichichekuba Tinde Yomare. Right, Jaga National Sobetung Tinde Yomakuba. Or till Lulaya Yorwa. Lulaya Yore, Shanking all at Tene. Sanje Ruchino Shangolia, and it Tamebe Kawas Zene. Nadud Nation me be sort of Sitay or Mother. The Olacora, Tije Molam the Leg, what in the me so Shuba Damashuba Sanje Regina, me so Shu, Young Ellen Deche Yorwa. The two dancer Nambachana. Arazu Tunzulit in the Shore Mato. Sanjelia Ramaba Kishiada. In the young Amara. Oh, teach you in this.
Mhm. So, upon having attained that kind of arhatship, one will then cast off these aggregates that have been taken up due to contaminated karma and afflictions. And it's not as though then one absolutely doesn't have a body, but rather can take up a mental body, a kind of body that is in the nature of mind, that is not subject to the sufferings of birth, aging, sickness, and death. It doesn't have the same kind of sufferings of samsara because one is no longer creating those kinds of causes. In that kind of a case wherein one has taken up a mental body to the sort of perspective of others, one might appear as an ordinary being and still being subject to the kinds of sufferings of samsara, dying, and so forth. But really, that is just a projection. Once one has taken rebirth in a mental body due to the force of prayers and the kind of ripening factors, one is no longer subject to the various kinds of sufferings of samsara, although it may appear to others as though one is.
Oh, yeah, do you say that? Oh, yeah. Then that's Sumba Namshidira. Sumba del Remocardo Sena. Sumba Chu Shandong Zebe Pirikis, Piuchi Tigua. The Shandong Galia Zadengiche. Quartewa, Penji, Kidigi, Legi, Nebam, Pasha, Zinji. Quarteji, Lady Pasha, Zinging Namshiti Sigura. Pakshati Gawata Miku Lekasane, Nubati Namshit into Teda Yora Paksha. Yawa Chiman Yinzam Chongenge, sumba namshe de tsomba yinse. Sumba namshe sayade. Da nipa duchi ye le sa, le degi nipa nyaa dengengi namshe chiwarwa. Tela sumba namshe sikidwa. Kyawa paa len chunga gyudu ji namshe sikira tela. Paa kyawa lang chunga gengi namshe tiri dani. Yo tindi, di sumba namshe sikira. Kyawa la ninzam chunga gengi sumba namshe di chunga siya. Tiche. Sumba namshe, namshe diwa tati churu mada. Namshe deli ya gyudu ji namshe siya, dredu ji namshe sinyi kudwa. Gyudu ji namshe siya, tanda kyawa len gengi chunga gengi namshe tili sikira. Di gyuyi tenri chanchura. Pika namsa ninzam chaane namshe tangbu chidwa, di namshe di dredu ki namshe sikira. Tan drebu leki, drebu mimbe kabki namshe sikira. Tati sumba namshe di sumba yinse. Tanda di gyudu ki namshe di shikidwa. Ya. Ya tichi lana.
Oh. So then following the first and second images representing initial ignorance and then formative actions, we have then the third image, which represents consciousness, particularly consciousness at the time of the cause or causal consciousness, is image is of a monkey climbing in a tree. And this illustrates the third factor of dependent arising consciousness. Again, particularly that consciousness that holds the kind of latencies or imprints that have been created through previous karmic actions. So consciousness holds the potencies or karmic predispositions of virtuous and non-virtuous karma that project rebirths in cyclic existence. And it is what makes the connection to the next lifetime. So here one has, when one first motivated by initial ignorance engages in various actions, those actions then leave latencies or potencies on this consciousness. And here we are identifying the kind of causal time consciousness, the time in which those latencies or potencies are laid down or are placed on that consciousness. And then we can speak as well about the kind of resultant time consciousness. Once one takes rebirth, there's that first moment of consciousness that is connected to a new lifetime. And that is particularly the resultant time consciousness. So here, what is being referred to is that consciousness at the time in which those potencies are being laid down by the karma that we have created.
Ya. Da chuzin, chu nali yoge chuzin yora. Chuzin le shukbe piri kiye se chuzin chi che di yora. Di kari tsungire se na shiba mingsu se dira. Migi nawa na che wangbo na mado re, tanda migi wangbo na wangbo ne wangbo che wangbo tuzu tuyirwa. Yi yongbo da yorwa ko shiba yose do yora. Tuzu tanda ma cha yomare, cha tu yomare. Pame kudra nidin dute yorma do shenda di migi nawa na tuzu cha tu yomara. Na chi wangbo na mado be ese, macha be, warji namshi tenbe ese, namshe tensake, namshe dipike shusara, ame kokba na shusara, mili kewa shisha cherda nga tuta, mili kewa shisha, ame kokba na liya shusare. Rwa. Ene, te kudra deba la, suji pumbu ta, tela nebe nambar sheba ta, sobu chaya ke ten rabsi, namshe tensake, kudra de yesarwa. Teche, pumbu ta, tela nebe nambar sheba ta se, namshe di te shu sarwa. Te kordo yebe soa doshi semba te kundunga nani shenda su yungira, shiba nyamdo sama yungura. Soa doshi semba rekba yili shiba seto siwara. Te yindi. Nambar shiba dan te kordo yebe soa dan doshi ta zulia mingi pumbu siwara. Sobo chasa ka pame kudra chiwarwa namshe tensa ti suji pumbu siwara. Tetan drawa de chasare, sheba tetan pame kudra dubati, liu chaya tetan drawa chasarwa, ti suji pumbu chasara. Dan namshe yosa de ko soa dushe semba rekba chi yorwa ngarazu mine shi kembo mena kona kari surgu nechi soche tegi ora. Otela mingshi pumbu siwara. 소송을 스매버체 민기파 다에 풍부선자 민시 풍부세기라 다던다 소지 풍부수도 구라되어 남시 댄서체 민기 풍부수도 텐토 남시 요사 소환도시 선바라 받쳐주요라 텔라 민기 풍부세 풍부가데 줍사라 전에 가서 네발라 풍부다 텔라 네베 넘버셰바다 테 코드조 소환도시 도시나 민기 풍부예라 된데 기시je 갑je 민수제 남이제 풍부 민수 찌르바 시바 민수 찌르바 텐데세 선배에 셔다 되 민수 시바 민수 시라 그러와 민수 찌르바스네 시바 민수 소수데 소부 차사게 대사 구다티체 와 민수데 테남신엽도 예베 심주 군중에는 현다토스시거라 야 어디 시바 민수데 선배에 셔라 다 겨울랑 서르다 겨울랑 배 담부 겨워더라 야
So here, then the fourth image depicts getting into a boat, like a boat that we would use to cross water or something. And so here, this illustrates the varieties of name and form. So form here is the combination of semen and ovum, which is dependent on the consciousness until its transformation into the sense faculties of the eye, ear, nose, and tongue. And name, so here, when it comes to first the form, when in this link of name and form is referring to when a being has first taken rebirth. This is within the sort of next life or the rebirth that they have taken. And at this point, then form, it refers to the combination of semen and ovum, which is in turn dependent upon the consciousness. When the consciousness enters that womb, then and connects with that form, in turn, that is the basis for a future being. And so this then contains or is the sort of dependent upon the consciousness until its transformation into the sense faculties of the eye, ear, nose, and tongue. So although there's the body faculty already and the mental consciousness, those other sense powers have yet to develop, or the sense faculties, I should say. And so then name is the consciousness that resides within the aggregate or with the aggregate of form, its concomitant mental processes of discrimination and feelings and the compositional factors. So name refers to the non-form compositional factors, including consciousness and feelings, discrimination, and so forth. And this fourth image illustrates any combination of name and form, the aggregates that are a karmic ripening at the moment when the birth stage occurs. So here, with this combination of name and form, again, form referring to the combination of semen and ovum, which is dependent on the consciousness, and then name being the consciousness and those concomitant mental factors that occur with that. This is really referring to that first, the ripening, the aggregates that are a karmic ripening at the moment when the birth stage occurs, when one has taken rebirth.
Oh yeah, do sure. That did Tandaganzo, Tome Marikba Sheswa, Niban Duchi Sheswa, Subanam Shiche, Shiba Minsus, Kevalanswa. That Telaya called this Yaba Seba, Kuba Lemba, Chuba Sibe Lesum de Yorwa. In a share maratanda. Kewachema Landusan Pig, Kebaseba Kuba Lembas, Yanshi Shera, the ticket shit of Girwa. This on the Panche, Chinachi, the Koya, the Kangashin, Tandalia, Delia, Kebaseba Kuba Lemba, Chuba Sibe, Share Maramato, Korwa. Tome Maru Kuna Niban to Les, Sumbanam Shiche, Shiba Minsus, Kewalambalea, Kebaseba Kuba Lemba Nibutigi. Niban duchi ki le sumba namshik tendu yobati nuba tuchen duche. Ani nuba tuchen duche tsare chuba sibe le che, ani shine kya langura. Sa sumbu de ma shebe mato, neva marwa ti kuwi ora, o tichi shena. Yeah.
So, here, in terms of this explanation, we have explained how there is this initial ignorance, which leads to formative actions, which in turn leaves potencies on the consciousness. And then, here, with this fourth name and form, we see then the sort of indicating the karmic ripening. Sorry, the aggregates that are a karmic ripening at the moment of when the birth stage occurs. Now, here in this way of explaining, we are not at this moment explaining then the factors of the 8th, 9th, and 10th factors of craving, grasping, and becoming. But it is the case that in order to have a rebirth, you need to have that kind of craving and grasping, which in turn makes potent, what gives sort of efficacy to the formative actions that one has previously accomplished. Those have to be sort of ripened or nurtured into existence. So here, although in terms of the way in which this is explained to describe the kind of birth process, we don't at this point see an explanation of the necessity of the 8th, 9th, and 10th links. Those are actually necessary in order for one to take rebirth. You have to have the factors of craving, grasping, and in turn becoming, which allows that karmic potency to ripen.
Oh yeah. Tanda delia. Jawa sum shegi wara. Tende yangla chungni shedu jawa sum lo ko shekamni shegi wara. Jesa ko tanda de chik she swa. Jawa tambu tome maru kun ngibandu ji sumba nam she she. Jawa chi rawa. Shiba mingsu she. Ngaba ki ji tuba rikba tumba sowa she. Chi jawa chi shegi doa. Shiba chuji ba jawa si yang jawa chi ma jawa sum shegi doa. Jawa sum shegi wara de. Sumbu re re le tende yangla ngeji ina. Pāñcē kō tēntē yāngā chūñi yōngu rā, inā kāngā shēgī mē duwa. Kāshē kiawā ngā mā liyo bā tīki pārbā tīli tsōni shē tōg rē. Kiawā chīmā kiawā dā kāshī sē shē tī tāngmā tō lē yo bā tī tsōni shē tōg yō rā. O tī ndē tōndā kiawā chī nē chī ndūs khōr nē, kiawā mā chē chē khōrē tī hā kō yā chē tō kiawā chī kiāng kiāng lī chāni shēgī yō mā rē. O tī chī lab nā, kī sō rā.
So, when it comes to the explanation of the 12 links of dependent origination, normally these are explained over the course of 3 lifetimes, right? So, in one life, we would have the kind of initial ignorance and then formative actions and the causal consciousness. And then in the next life, we have our name and form and the 6 sense bases and so forth. And in turn, when we get to then birth and aging and death, we'd have to speak of a different life. So, when it comes to the kind of explanation of the 12 links of dependent origination in order, we are understanding this kind of causal process, but it's not the causality that occurs within a single lifetime. One is getting an understanding of this process, but when it comes to the way that they actually play out, it is over multiple lifetimes. And this highlights the kind of way in which this is cyclical, in which we are constantly contributing to the causes that lead to renewed rebirth within samsara.
Oh yeah. Tā dīpa chā, kā kāngpa ngāpa tere tuwa, ngāpa te. Ngāpa pē rīmu tila kāri tuwa sā, kāngpa tōngpa pīri si tuwa, kāngpa tōngpa si tuwa. Nē tī kāri sā, ngundu ji sībē kāp ji, nāmi ji phōngpu rī chūr bē, mīngna sō ji wāngpu sār tu, tuwa bē, ngāpa kēchī rī tsūpa yin sā. Tā kāngpa tōngpa tī kāri tere sā na, kāngpa tōngpa pē tā rīmu tī kāri tsūmpu rī sā na, ngundu ji sībē kāp ji, nāmi ji phōngpu rī chūr bē, mīngna sō ji wāngpu sār tu, tuwa bē, ngāpa kēchī rī tsūmpa yin sā. Tī mīgī wāngpu, nāyā wāngpu, nā wāngpu, chē wāngpu lā sōkpa, tī sū kō sār tu tā tuwa bē. Tī ngāpa kēchī rī tsūmpa, mīgī kēchī, nāyā kēchī, nāyā kēchī, sī rā lū jī kēchī sā, mīgī kēchī, nāyā kēchī, tī sū tu bē, kāp tī lī shē kī wā rī sē rā. Yā tī chī lām nā, ngundu jī sī bā sā wā rā. Ngāpa kāngpa tōngpa pīrī jī rā, ngundu jī sī bē kāp jī, nā mī jī phōngpu rī kyō bē, mīngna sō jī wāngpu sār tu tuwa bē kēchī. Ngundu jī sī bā sī tu, sī bā tī lā, sī bā shī wā, kī sī shī wā, kēmā tā bā tī kī sī bā. Anī shī wā tī, ngā mā nī shī wā tī lī chī sī sī wā, kisi so tambo de la chiwe wan de tambo chisi de che tene persi de tu tene kisi de tu di chema yo ya de ya ngundu ji se ba se ra ena tanda ganso ju ye de ngundu ji se bal ne de ra ganso kanga 하면 인점 잘 되네셔네 미차네 대대가로와 근데 시바라 다시마 시수나 치시티 쪽으로와 제마 원도잖아 상군도 시바스도 저 가릴랑게네 대갑 그 겨랑 사러와 탄다 대갑 제 메나와나 미이나 미 던도이나 던도 도서 메나와나라 소바테즈 트ub데베 갑텔시고라 근데 시바스 시바시나는 근데 시바 아저 전에 당부 치시시 전에 벌시제 전에 기시제 근데 전에 저도 안 맞히고 온도잖아 맨날 지게 온도 당부 기시제 로 전에 문제 있어봐세 전에 치시제 전에 벌시제 두스만 돈에 되어라 단다 간수 문제 있어볼 내 되어라 야 되실라나
So then the fifth image is an empty house. This illustrates the fifth factor of dependent arising, the six sense bases. This is the newly formed sensory faculties, visual, auditory, and so on, which are the aggregates that are a karmic ripening during the existence stage, which is previous to death. So here, when it comes to then this fifth of these links, this illustrates through a kind of an empty house, the newly formed sensory faculties. And these are referred to as the aggregates that are a karmic ripening during the existence stage, which is previous to death. So here, there's sort of various existence stages we can talk about. There's kind of the birth existence, usually that becoming moment. And then there is the kind of existence stage previous to death. So there are four of these. There's sort of our birth stage. We could talk about the then being in the stage which is previous or prior to death. And then there would be the death existence followed by bardo, which in turn then leads to another birth existence and so forth. And so here, when it comes to then this fifth factor of the six sense bases, this is referring to the kind of life that we have right now, the existence stage, which is previous to death. So before our death comes, what we have now is the kind of existence stage prior to death. Among those four, the birth existence, bardo existence, death existence, and then sometimes it's translated as prior existence, meaning that which is before we die, the existence that we are in.
Oh yeah. This one. Oh, that trukpa did that. Trukpa. Chugu pugu chunju chadese. Ochebe irikise. Yunga namshi sum sardo. Dune yujin juwa. Chebar chebe. Ene simju trukpa. Rekpa de chans. Tagi wangbo tesarwa. Mego wangbo na wangbo luwantu tesarwa. Kiti yudan chene nyoya de mehe sara. Tanda shine yudan chene. Rekcha rabachine sobu. Rekcha de tema de da. Tende yogu yusara. Luwan de trupsadu. Tigita rekcha yik. Yagada duwa da tsuchi tsorsu tigla rekpa de yungu wara. Cheba de. Yu. Oti yungu wara. Ti yobatali ya. Karsara. Trukpa rekpa sikdwa. Trukpa rekpa. Rekpa de tsambaya siya tene. Tindigdwa.
So then next, the sixth image depicts kissing a child, which illustrates the sixth factor of dependent arising, contact. So contact is a mental factor that once the object, sensory faculty, and consciousness newly come together, distinguishes the attributes of the object. So here, this is a mental factor, contact, which is based upon the previous link of those six sense bases. So our six sense faculties are newly formed, and then they begin to contact various objects. So the coming together of those sensory faculties, consciousness, and the object then leads to this sixth factor of contact, which is depicted as it's kissing a child.
Oh yeah, this yeah, that timber dera, timber. Kibu migla dasu be pirikis, remote carosne, Michi million dajam shantashi jabna dasu dangi shiware. Ane yuwa namshi sum dube regbe kenjis, ta yu che, wangbo che namshi sum du rwa nyamdo, yu wangbo tu sare, ane yu reksharabchi, lugi reksharabchi, ane tele tene namshi soa titu nyongengi namshi she sum di tup sare ta, tup kiwara. Kibu mila dasu be piriki, yuwa namshi sum dube regbe kenji semla tsorna sheshir juwe titu nyowar chebe timba tsorwa de chebe ta tsowa yungwar shine. Ame kokpa de yuna sobu liwa de trupshe reksharabshi tema teta tinde yungwara. O di trupwa rekpa timba tsorwa se tsore. Yuwa namshi sum chebala tene ta tsowa titu yakbu du samsa, koye mego du samsa de bata mende bata ro o chindege soati yongore dewa tonge parma sum de ya islamna.
So then the seventh image is a person whose eye is being pierced by an arrow. This illustrates the seventh factor of dependent arising, feeling. So the condition of contact, which arises from the assembly of the object, sensory faculty, and consciousness, causes an experience of pleasure or pain to arise in the mind, predominantly experienced as a feeling. So here we have then beginning with the time in which one is in the womb, when that form is established, and then one has these six sense bases, and due to the sense faculties, consciousness, and consciousness coming into contact with an object, this then gives rise to various feelings. So this can begin from the time in which one is still in the womb. One has that form established, those faculties established, and thereby gives rise to the experience of feeling, wherein there's a sense of like, oh, this is good or this is bad, pleasurable, painful, and so forth.
Oh yeah, this one. Yeah, that did it. Geba kibu chantong ve pirikisa michi chantong denge shitwa. Larian geba chima penji gese. Ta geba chima penji ge geba seba de sheyora. Ta tene soa titu nyonge chasarwa. Tene ma rimbe ma ngene ke metse koran soa titu mabu nyancha do degra. Tanta mai kokbe naliwa de tene ma ke tichene ma tichene ko soa tewa tunge tanyo metse nalia. Ta keche drabada she sun drabada tonge kalan drabada saya. Ta soa titu tewa tunge tanyo mabu che nyon degra. Ti nyon ne sore ti tama talia. Ta jikden chima. Ya chima droyage le delia so tamge. So tab sudo le de ya nuba tujen do soya derwa. Sabyo rezi tab shingsa yaguche ni tele chuche. Ti tata lu to su kemna ni ya nuba tujen juni ya ke ungura. O ti na shingche siwara. Ni ta kyawa chima droyage le ya niban duchi ki le ya so tam ti nuba chenpo soya derwa. Kyawa seba ase. Kuba lemba tiye so tab ke ora. Kyawa seba tege. De tama mese korana le seba da mambu yorata. Mese kora kera. Tama telea chigalamara chilia chana. Seba de mendrewa se, mendre sebe de chasedwa. Tachi soso chi mebra chedra chide. Te ganga meba machana samsa. Te da sente da ne lu lonju da. Soa da tuzo madre da samsa ge. Samlu chungora. Mendre sebe de chasedwa. 자 버루제 통해 매월 셔도 반제 흘러서 신내스요다. 동자 고자 시스템시 전에시라 초에 시키트 반제 연구 말아. 에네 그걸 렘바스도자 야 찍래야 야 통해 요나섬 sayada chi yona samsara chi ngu sara. Tago chi meba chadra chi yona samsara chi. Kuba lemba setara. Shukchar dhora. Keba seba de mendrena samsara chura. Tatene chi tomna samsara. Ra yona samsara chi. Tonya yona samsara chi yona samsara. Tende seba shukchibu yogara. Tila kuba lemba sekdwa. Ta keba seba do kuba lemba nipu tege. Nyama saa shange nipa duchi ki le keme ke kaya runga chilya. Sui tabki wara. Nipa tuchen duchi ki wara. Tichi lamna. Keba seba de lamna tambo. Kawa lesa.
So then we get to the eighth image of a person drinking beer, which illustrates the eighth factor of dependent arising craving. And this is a craving for pleasure and freedom from pain, which further makes potent the karma that projects future rebirth. So here we have, again, to look at this process, this kind of feelings that arise based upon there being then a kind of contact between the various sensory faculties, consciousness, and various objects. And so here it is that begins kind of in the womb. We have various feelings. And then once we are actually born, throughout all of our lives, we see all kinds of different things. We experience all kinds of different sights and sounds and objects and have various different kinds of feelings. Now, these links of the eighth and ninth links of craving and grasping are really the kind of we have craving and grasping of all different kinds, but these are the factors that cause the karmic actions that we have previously accumulated to be nurtured, to be sort of made potent such that they can cause future rebirth. It causes those kinds of it creates the conditions for those karmic causes that we have created in the past to become potent, to sort of become effective. So we have craving for various things throughout our lives. We have the kind of desire to have things or not be separated from things. But this in particular is referring to craving at the time of our death, wherein we don't want to be separated from all it is to be alive. There's a kind of craving for existence. Now, when we are killed suddenly, or if we die suddenly, maybe all of these things happen in a much more rapid kind of succession. But when it comes to the time of our death, there's a sense of like wanting to hold on to something that we feel we are going to lose, a kind of existence. There's a craving to still be alive, this feeling of wanting something or needing that kind of existence. And in turn, that particular kind of craving and then grasping at the time of death is what creates the kind of potencies of those previously accumulated karmas to lead to a future rebirth. So these factors, particularly of craving and grasping, although these are things that we accumulate, we engage in throughout all of our life, this is particularly referring to those at the time of death that are craving for existence.
Oh yeah, tende. Oh, tende so. Le neba tuje do juar sibe. Dewa toba da dunge da trawa sebe. Sebe de ches tende so sa. Tende bache. Ta kuba dirwa. Kuba. Ta de. Ta de da. Ta de keba seba da kuba lemba she so andele ya. Ta dagi yige ngazo. Tome mere kunel nibandu lesa sumba namshi she shiba minsu chide. Keba seba kuba lemba chuba seba do sheba so. Tita chane she go yara. Jene shi kewa chimatela ya. Chujiba kewa chunjiba kashichiriba tende serma. Shidu kashichiriba tende serma do ya. Keba seba kuba lemba shek mare tome marwa nibandu ju sumba namshi do shek madwa. Tita yege sheba dige chane she go yara. Kewa chimate se yuda. Jene ya chimatela. Chujiba kewa chunjiba kashichiriba tende se. Nima do shek madwa. Shanda kanga tama kewa parba tang ti tama la sheba. Tome marwa niba duju sumba nam shetu tama she sara. Keba seba kuba lemba chuba seba de tanda de shekdwa. Tiga tsone she kuyo ara. Ya oti chi lamnek tambo.
So then that gets into the eighth a factor of craving and grasping, which in turn lead to a future existence becoming. So here, when we are going through the 12 links of dependent origination, although it is the case that we have the kind of craving and grasping which foster or nurture that karmic potency into a future rebirth, they aren't explicitly explained earlier. Like we have, again, initial ignorance that leads to formative actions, which then leave potencies on the consciousness. And in turn, then we take rebirth as a being. However, here again, the way in which these are explained, those kinds of links which lead to the ripening of that karma and lead to a future rebirth are explained here as 8, 9, and 10, and don't explicitly get explained in the 1, 2, 3, and 4. However, we should understand that their sort of role in that process of taking rebirth. And so too, when it comes to the last two of these 12 links of dependent origination of birth and then aging and death, there are many more factors that are involved there, right? We need to understand the way in which these are sort of interlocking, and the explanation that occurs of one at one point is illustrative of how it functions within the larger context of the 12 links of dependent origination.
Well, this one. Yeah. Kuba Kibu Shendo got a Kibu Shendo Nashindo name be villages of Michigan, Shendo Nashindo Lingiwadua. And then look at a Sibe Longe, the Tobe Chedos, Siba Coag, Longe de Tobe Cheswada. Agora Chaban de Sha, Kuba Lambata, they were share. Kuba Lambata to do Sarshara. The love so, yeah, teach you love na. Kuba Lambata.
So then we turn to the 9th image, which is of a person picking fruit from a tree, which illustrates the 9th factor of dependent arising, which is grasping. This is a form of attachment, an excessive craving for the resources of existence for the sake of obtaining them. So in the 8th, we have this kind of craving that sort of makes potent that karma and projects for further rebirth. And then with the 9th, grasping, this is a form of attachment or excessive craving, which again, in turn leads to the sort of making potent those previously accumulated karmas and leads to becoming.
Oh, yeah. This one. Oh, yeah, teacher. Kuba Lambata do so. Chitanko Sebaside, Ambo Chaya de la Sebasigora, Lambaside Shukcherichin, Toyag Kabi Sebatella, Lambas, Shukchijun to the Lechadoa. Tanda Delia, Mende Seben de Cha, Yang Seba, Yang Savage, Lag Tilicharoa. O Chidaya gave Sebase, the Lambaside, Shechijun Chane, Ambo Cha Tiko do some. I have Tabshichi Kabi Sebatella. Lembatin Geshe Yongutua, Tindrimusha. Yeah. No, de lotion to matter. We made too much pirate, tap, we may, Uji Yobashi, too much this Ramutua. The Sebata Lemba, Lemba Narji Niba, Duchi Yelela, sweat up the Yansi Chima, Pembala, Nuba Tujendo, Juba Sibe. She Kulan debut, Sibe, Koye, Mingi Takba, Juba Sibe led somebody knows. That day, Juba Sibe led Pemichila Puchi, you was state or Tangaran Jidene, Geshe Chabe Kechera. The Juba Sibe led to share your Esera. Oh, Anakade Siba de Sume. Oh, Tita. Le never to gender Juba Tiroa. To the Juba Sibasacas, Joachima de la Sibasera, Corawa, Koi Joachimati, Lealia, never to J. Juba Chazan of Chi, Sanson that did debut mean the Q led the Latasharwa. Juba Sibel has over there. Siba, koye kyawa pensi ki le nipa tujen dili juba sibe le se sharo. Siba kowa de sigara. Da koye kyawa chima de le ya ge nipa tujen sonza drebi mindi kyula su taade. Sibe le se ingi nipa tuji le nipa tujen tu sheba tira. Seba da lembe nipa tujen tu sheba tira. Nikara nipa tuji ki le la so tabde yansi chima pebala. Nipa tujen tu kyurwa shuba sibe le. Kyulan drebu sibe mingi. Tabe shuba sibe le de chambar shiba. O ti rimutila tani ti kawar che kura esi kura. Ya ti la tis.
So, here with regard to the 8th and 9th links, craving and grasping, first we have that kind of craving that arises. And really, grasping is kind of like a strengthening of that craving. So, when we have a craving, there is a desire for something. But once we kind of go toward actively seeking that out, wanting to get that thing, then it becomes grasping. So when we have a kind of thought, a wish for further existence, followed by the sort of making an effort at that, more like grasping for a further existence, this is where craving goes from being craving to grasping. So we should look at these as being one kind of a strengthening of the other. And then when we are ready to be born, here then the 10th image is a pregnant woman, which illustrates the 10th factor of dependent arising, becoming. So craving and grasping nurture the karma of the previous second factor, conditioning factors, and this karma now becomes potent and can project the next rebirth. So calling this karma the 10th factor, becoming, is a case of giving the name of the effect, becoming or cyclic existence, to the cause. So here, this 10th factor of becoming, and here there are various kinds of translations of this because it's the same word that we use as for cyclic existence. And this is referring to the sort of moment when, due to the factors of craving and grasping, the kind of potency is of the karma that one has previously accumulated become potent enough to give rise to a future rebirth, to project the next rebirth. And so this then is a case of giving that cause the name of the result. So one will become or be existent, and that is then given to the cause, that potent, fully ripened, like that karma that has the potential to give rise to a rebirth is then given the name of becoming, which is really the effect of that. So this 10th image of the pregnant woman then is illustrating the factor of dependent arising called becoming, which is when the second factor, conditioning factors or formative actions, have become potent enough to actually lead to projecting another rebirth.
Oh yeah, so this one. Da chukchi barwa. Chukchi ba peme chuku tsebe pirige. Da peme chile pu chigi yuwa. Sanjere chirwa. Nye chere chi. Na nye debres tengira. Pirige se. Le ji siba le. Le dedan drewe yansi chime. Kyewa. Siba chukchi ba kyewa. Chamba yeno se. Da de ko pu chigi yuwa dege. Chukchi ba. Kene kyewa yang kyewa chima tilang yuwa. O ti chabare shara. Ya, ti shara.
So the 11th image is a woman giving birth to an infant, which illustrates the 11th factor of dependent arising called birth. This is the birth stage of the next lifetime, a rebirth arisen from and connected to the karma called becoming. So birth then is the first moment of the birth stage of the next lifetime, and it is then connected to and arisen from the karma that is called becoming, that 10th factor, which in turn gives rise to the next life, this birth.
This one, oh yeah. Da chuchi bande, da chungi barwa. Tom dengi mi roku we piriki. Kyewa langba teta. Delwe, kyewe nasu shendu gyurwe. Kawa ta. Pungbi Return Dorwe, Shiva de Chuniba, Kashichiri, Betende, Chamba Yenose. Oh, Jita, Chuniba derwa. Tom dance Pelina, Roy can get a mimic sayora. Kanga Lava Changimade. Kora mimic sayora. Tell a Tom dance shore. Of that debasere. Cookid the Kanga Legace, Sama teacher, Robache, Cole Nyambada teacher. Tell a Tom dance segura. Tatanda. Roy Legace again to Zuma Kidra Sigara, Lesibas. Tom Dandy Miruku Epirikis, oh, Mitsuta, Road to the Kidra, Ramutishora, Tikarlangur, Karitsungursana, Karakoko, Piriki, Kawa Lamba Teda, and Delue, Give Natsu Shanto Give Kawata, Kawa Lang Sarisha, and Etic Damadashi, and Thomas Shindra Pumbuta, Lutan Sem Kakandroate, Pumbu. Return Dores, number Sheba de Pumbu, me na me Pumbu de Torne, Shandash Semki Kundi Shandash Rugora, Pumbu return, me return the Pumbu Dora te Shiva te Chuniba Gashi, Chiriwet and the Sabanos. That Kawachi Matalia, Sujiba Kawachi, Chuniba Gashi Chiriwet and this mother. Shanda Shiba Mesu Nabaki to the Shemado, to Tagan Shemba, Namatele Sheba de Sun the Sheku Yora. Oh, yeah, teach you love.
So then the 12th image is an undertaker carrying a human corpse, which illustrates the 12th factor of dependent arising, aging and death. Aging is the transformation of the physical state of the being you have been born as in the above rebirth. Death occurs when that aging being sheds his or her respective aggregates. So here, this and the word that has been translated as undertaker is really someone who is endowed with power. So in Tibet particularly, there were those who specifically worked with corpses, who had the kind of duties of taking care of the dead, and people would give gifts to them and so forth so that they would take care of bodies. I mean, I'm not sure if it's that sort of stiff here in the United States, but here those beings then who carry a human corpse are illustrative of this 12th factor of dependent arising, which is aging and death. And so aging occurs with this sort of transformation of the physical aggregates that we have been born in, and death is when that aging being sheds his or her respective aggregates, as in the future life, when one casts off whatever kind of physical aggregates one had of this life, the body and the mind separate and they go to a future life. Death then is referring to that process or that time wherein the body and the mind separate. One casts off the body of this life and moves into a future life. So again, as we have seen throughout this, the 11th image of, or sort of the 11th of these 12 links of birth, then is followed immediately by aging and death. However, in between there, we need to understand, although it is not explicitly explained, the link of name and form and the 6 sense bases and contact and feeling and so forth, which occur on that stage of existence after one has been born and before there is aging and death. So here again, although these follow this kind of order, we need to understand the way in which these links kind of fit together.
Oh, yeah. Oh, did it, Tatane? Oh, really, I teach the Rode, teaching Ra, Pungju, Chagul Jayasiore, Melo Jayasiore, Salapayasiore, Sumgayora, Baba Inenda. Salapay, me not a tujar on Gurnet and Reina, and a Pumbu de Salapaydoa. Saul Payre. Actually, Churgay, never not a tujar and Gurnet in a Salapaydoa. Oh, Tenia Kashe, Lamata Chambura, Sosu Lamatindena, Meletriate order, Metatangre. A Kashe, the Meta Madan Sigra, Manshake, Meletragamare. Then a Chagul trade the Kachira. Chita Mizu Samlina Tindua, Kashe, Mel Matanas, Sosu Sambuche Day, Swati, Yungis at Shenja Chetara. 시소대 풍부대 알아서 라루 샤다 직보 차사르마도 딜케게 요마라 아이네 소소 현자로 저기 가셔 멜트라한테 야오메도 삼사 땡게도와 데디 케바치에 요마라 가셔게 되는 싸울 빼는 부수도 버렸지 그때 이렇게 현자치란데라 가셔 작을 때나다 강가 또 내티잖아 피득자도 삼 이땡기도와 야오메도 삼기도와 이나 벌어서 멜타 거기서나 멜마타로 자고테로 세그래 다시 가르스는 짐발 줘요라 소소샤데 코 자고를 지 사고요라 짐베랑을 땅기요라 저다 자고를 줘야 돼 가시고래 그 자고 샤데 짐바당을 해서거라 따이네 지다 메게데 근데 삼비 말데 이네 틀 메가 징게지요 말에 나 당부 삼로데 때래 가셔 때 자고를 떼셔 메타 마당 하시그라 근데 들와 근데 로스죠 어디야 가셔 신권부 손자를 사러 지틴데서 때 싸울 배션에 배여라 신틴데 공부도 말이 신겨라 메사다요 이나 어디 지다고 자굴 때에 침바 손세 소소 소부대 자굴이 침바 당내 우리 삼틴데 전에 침배장 주요라 야 되질라 언제서
So here, when it comes to dealing with death, in Tibet in particular, there are different ways in which bodies are disposed of. There is the sort of tradition of giving to the vultures. There are those that are cremated. There are those that are buried. And sometimes bodies are placed in water. However, when it comes to the kind of customs of dealing with those who have died, Tibetans tend to favor being given to the vultures, being chopped up and given to the vultures. Now, there are those cases where there are cremations done. For example, when it's a high lama, someone who's very precious and well regarded, they might be given a cremation. And when someone has died of like a contagious disease that could be dangerous, often they will be buried because of that kind of contagion. Now, there are those who, like, prior to their own death might think like, well, I don't want to be cremated. Well, like, I can't imagine my body being burned. And really that's kind of a sign of excessive attachment to the aggregates of this life. When one's corpse is burned, it's not as though you are being burned. So this is kind of a sign of too much attachment to the aggregates of this life. Or maybe someone might think like, oh, I don't want to be buried. It would be so constrictive, like I'll be, in the ground and something like that. But again, if we, or someone might think like, I can't imagine being chopped up and offered to vultures. Well, again, when it comes to the corpse, it's not you anymore. However, the reason that many Tibetans favor the idea of a kind of sky burial or giving the body to the vultures is because one's body then becomes an act of generosity. So here, when it comes to and whether or not most Tibetans are actually sort of thinking of it in that way, this is something that is highly regarded because of the
어야
fact that there is that ability to be
무서워
generous. So some people think that, oh, there wasn't enough wood in Tibet and they couldn't do cremations, or they liked to bury bodies or things like that. However, it's not the case that there wasn't enough wood. People can do that kind of cremation. There is enough wood for that. But the thing that people are attracted to is the idea of being generous with one's corpse.
어야 전에 때에 어때다 개발자면도 와 예말 로설이야 이 예보다 더 속에 야 로데 페이지 텔레 잘라름 텐데 냠도샤 텐데 제 연구도 별에게 뭐 당부 텐데도 와 잘라켈라름 텐데 그 풍부 냠도샤제 야부제 서울 페이지 예보다 더 소야 가셔샤도 와 지금 레나서부터 가셔야한테 메타다나 텔라라부시데 직샤에 텐데 로세도 와 그 롱바 소소 가레 네티 야보도 와 대사이나 멜트라에 대 야보도 와고 장마레 차체 아티 임바체 개모치 나한테는 가서 디말로긴다 다단다 텐데 야라 중니 춘지지 따데 셰르와 대셰데 가담 파줄레스 롱장아와 가담 파줄스니 조지바데 아디샤 송샵치와라 디나다 근데 가레 중니 보데 persona 야라 중니 단다 리무트 샤샤보데 Pedele tende tenda shekdwa. Kanda drawa chawe si se hotezo drabu di sanje sene lame shene de sonse. Ane lama ke de songu to se. Kar songu to se na. Tene lole de sonse tati lo shene hamo ke skeme doa. Mari kemo loma te stambu tome mari ba sonje tela. Mari ba sonje tela kemo loha chi tiye che. Duchi tane tsak nipan duchi gile sonje tela tsakengi nechen dramanda soa che. Namshi tivu tabu de se, namshi te tivu tabu de rawa, sumba namshi te kasakal rotengeri chi ora tema se tivu pechani shekdwa tabu de se. Mingda su ne chungju da se, mingda su de churu tambu chulu ya teba de se. Chura che, tembu memre son medro. Kichi yuguru tongba de se. Tene mege kichi nawe kichi tozu chaba de rawa. Tamba tongba chi che, tanda namshi da tozu soa didu yongju ibe kichira. Ene rekba ochi drawa de se. Rekba de chugu chungju chi liya chi ochi ba kati kichi tende tete. Soa mela dagyab de se. Sora de chunje de la mele dagyab chi rimu shi ore se. Seba de, gyaba seba chunje de la me chang tongge chi. Seba chang tong drashi taas. Lemba se de, kuba lemba de kara se, shingdo nyom drate se ro. Me chi shingdo tene ta, togu yuba chi. Seba truman drashi, chuba seba de, truman pame puku chi yuba chi de. Kyawa tela pujin dra, kyawa te tela puku cheba. Puku cheba se, chetan puta pomo niga pu sikira. Pu po pu mo sikira. Ta tesa ku puku mingde pu po laya sora chene. Pu sidi pu po ra che kuda pomo sikira. Inji pu sidi nigal kora. Puda pomo sikira. Pu po pu mo sikira. Pu cheba dan ra sikira. Kashi ruku dra sikira. Kashi te rokuwa dan ra. She somba tar. Hodi lo shan digiri. Yeah.
So, when it comes to the way that we deal with burying our dead in various cultures, we can see even in the past in Tibet, like for example, kings were buried with various of their possessions, and we see that in some other cultures as well, as if they were going to be able to somehow use those again or come back and get them or something like that. And we see that there are various traditions of burial or of cremation. Cremation is a very nice, clean way to deal with corpses and so forth. But there are various ways in which cultures deal with their dead, and we should respect that. Now here we will turn back to the teachings in the book, a quotation to support this from the Kadam Father teachings, and this is something that was between Atisha and Dromtonpa, which is really composed by Atisha. And so it says then, if I were to ask you to illustrate these 12 factors, what, O conqueror, would you say they are like? And this is really drawing from the Buddha's teachings, but in Atisha's words. The teacher Atisha taught Drom the following. This is taught in scripture, and really we have gone through this, so there isn't too much to add. Ignorance is like a blind old woman. Conditioning factors resemble a potter, while consciousness is like a monkey. When we think about our consciousness, our mind, how it kind of jumps all over the place, it's a bit like a monkey. A name and form is like getting into a boat. So here that is getting into a boat. When we think about getting into a boat on water, there's a little bit of like instability to that. While the 6 sense bases are like an empty region. Contact is said to be like a kiss, particularly like kissing a child or something, that making of contact. While feeling is like an arrow in the eye. Craving is said to be like drinking beer, while grasping is like reaching for fruit, when we're sort of reaching, wanting to get something. While becoming is said to be like a pregnant woman, while birth and is like birthing that child, and aging and death is said to be like carrying a corpse. So here And just as a note, when it says while birth is like birthing that child, the word that is used here is pu, which often is referring, people think is referring only to males. But this is really a gender neutral kind of a term. It refers to both male and female children. So we shouldn't think that, although in these days, often when people see pu, they think it's automatically referring to a male. That isn't necessarily the case. And we don't have that problem here in the English.
Oh yeah, this one. Oh yeah, that di ma lo shana. Kowe kolo tese kora siba kolo sigra. Kowe kolo sinela siba kolo sin chibara. De tane chida de tatelia chida shinji ji du sun go de ma sa gemne sagi yebe piri cha la be ndu sangere chiwara. De rumbu de kar chungu ora sena sigora. Chida shinji sungshe de sawe piri ki kowe niju tamje leda nyumumbe shangwache ki midagba yinbese. Ku tenpochi yo mardo. Le nyumoge wange le sa ti wange karikari yondo ine tendenke soso rawange yo marwa. Sa ko shangwache re midagba nyegi niju samma tamje jigbe rangshe chumbare sawaside ko sen meba chaya yibeke. Kongone sangede ke yo marwa. Ina ko tin jigbe rangshe chayimba chujele re suwara. Te sawe piri ki se kore niju tamje ne jigden koran se wara ne koran de metakba shegra marazu temburo shibi sorgu yorte sayum kyapchi de ko jure yobete da ha ko do chita ko tite koran zo re lega che kare ne jurde yordo sayum kyatsu ko jurgu yobeta re chira ko ngazu temburo shibi tongu yorte tenchen rebana juwa sonza mangbo chel teshen regu yora kowe ne jigden da chuji semje longche ba bodela kansa do sigara tamje leda nyombe shama chenge medaba imbese lenye je wang ko juan ko ro de tike ke ro de yordo juan mandro ke chi yo mar tangara je pa ya bu sebo tom ma do juan rakba do tongir ma do cham do tongir ma ro samlo tane shingir ma do ke chi jondo yora de do so re le ga che ni jondo yora nyomba shamachi ni medaba yimbe te tamje tar medaba yimbe imba nije soam jigbe ran shela mande bad sama ni chu jin je da sama tamje ko kechi njone tamatala pa ne jigne meba chaya yimba de kanga te chuni re se te hakoya chedo ramuti tebule se gara ya te chilama.
So then, just to read the next section, the Lord of Death, Yama, is grabbing the outside of the wheel of cyclic existence and devouring it. So although this is not like a literal kind of an interpretation, there is no actual Lord of Death sitting there eating this thing. This is to illustrate the lack of stability. So this drawing illustrates that all the habitats and inhabitants of cyclic existence are impermanent in the sense of being under the sway of karma and the afflictions. So here we have this sense of things as being so stable, so lasting, as though there were some kind of a permanence, when really it is the case that we are all under the sort of control of, or we are due to being within cyclic existence, we are subject to impermanence. We are under the control of karma and the afflictions. And therefore, everything within this cycle of existence does not pass beyond the nature of perishing. All must be ultimately consumed by their impermanence. So here, again, we have this sense of things as being quite stable. But if we were to say be in an earthquake, we realize like things are constantly sort of moving. We aren't in that kind of solid environment that we feel. Everything is changing moment to moment. And it is only when we actually think about it that we can recognize that kind of impermanence of all phenomena. But normally we feel like ourself as well as our environment has this kind of stability, this kind of permanence. So really, what is being indicated by Yama, the Lord of Death, holding this whole wheel of cyclic existence and devouring it, is to indicate our impermanence, to indicate that we are all ultimately to be consumed by impermanence, and we are not beyond the kind of nature of perishing, of passing away.
Oh yeah. 다 대ten도 서르무 데로와.
Mm.
아야 저래. 대ten도 시바 콜로다 용소 만드바다 시바 콜로 줘라. 대답에 가가체네. 에네 산제기 야 나와를 시체 나와들 창조 텐도스 차도스 장도스 텐데게 줘라 들어. 대ten도 시바 콜로다 용소 만드바스 배 가가체네. 시바 콜로가 셰테 로스 줘라. 만드바 텔레 파시 텔레베 야 케바도 파시 가가체네 시고라. 파시 제네스 가가체버들 제스도 가가체네 세트네. 제네 템바 상제 좀 된데지 구수 신내 상제야 신된게시 차장데 양해는 대버 천지 양대 타르버 천지 양해 코라미야 녀모바 세베 왕게 차당게 녀모 당지 세베 왕게 아니 타르버 토비 와도 양해는 대버 녀모 빵바 라 양해는 대버데 천지 나와나 신세 빼샤 전에 긴고를 뜸바자 나외 긴고도 도시야 찬주야 땡겐치 튀어라 대피리데 가르치 고고 열었으나 코알레 타바르 제베 탑 람제 템바스 코알레 타로 제베 탑이 어레세 람곰네 다메베 동반이다 메다바다 동해와라 소바 코알레 인종기 체도 메다바다 동해와고 엘랭에반 조소나 트레드소나 동해이라시 토나에 동반이 곰네 야들레 타로 람제 템바 요레세 교단 깨라 마트베 ngobuche yo marwa 교진 가르네 교진데 매버 소샤나 공고부데 매버 렌도 요라 교진 매네 ngo부데 중에 요 말에 교단 깨치 요라고 어때인데 그 교대 자외 교대 매버 소샤 데부 매버 레도데 춘이레 되어라 자때 타야 요레 텔레 교요레 테 ngo부레 교대 까나 에네티 용구레 교대 가르스데 텐데야라 춘이고네 셰사라 어때인데다 다 매발에서 뭐 어디 통매 마력받이 매발서에 시거라. 코알레 타발집에 탑 남지 템바데 쳐봐다. 남게 뭐네 그래. 남게 나와 되는 양대도 선배지라. 너야. 양에 맞지. 두세. 어야 되시네. 그래. 뭐야? this one. 어이구, 맞지. 어딘데 사셔야? 그렇지, 다 된다 그랬어. 전에 비리기스라 나와 가르고대 비리기. 거기 주다 제바 용수 세배 용수 타르바 고베 템바데 첨바이노 선다와데 고데 암냥데 어디 첨바이 스티치로나 야
So
비서
I think we're just trying to let Geshe know that the time, we've actually reached the time. But here, elevated above and distinct from that wheel of life, without being mixed with it, the blessed Buddha, the teacher, is depicted, standing with his arm extended and pointing at the full moon, which symbolizes nirvana. So here, in this full illustration, you have Yama, the Lord of Death, holding this wheel of cyclic existence, And then the Buddha is standing separate, apart, distinct from that, elevated above and distinct from that wheel of life, symbolizing that he is no longer mixed with that kind of renewed rebirth due to karma and afflictions. And he is depicted then with his standing with his arm extended and pointing at the full moon, which is symbolizing nirvana, that kind of freedom from this cycle of existence. And this illustration, external to the central picture, symbolizes the truth of the path, the method of being liberated from cyclic existence, and the truth of the cessation that is complete liberation from cyclic existence and its causes, symbolized by a white moon in the sky. So here, based upon a recognition that everything is dependent upon causes and conditions, therefore, if there is a cause for our renewed rebirth within cyclic existence, by eliminating that cause through developing what we call the truth of the path and eliminating the causes that lead to renewed rebirth within cyclic existence, one can attain the truth of cessation, a cessation that is a complete liberation from cyclic existence and its causes. So here, the ability to attain liberation is based upon an understanding of the Four Noble Truths. First, that there is a true suffering, which is created, which is caused, and that there is a way to end that true suffering by cultivating true paths, which in turn leads to true cessation, a complete liberation from the causes of from cyclic existence and its causes. And so this, outside of the main depiction of the Wheel of Life, symbolizes the Buddha teaching the path to liberation from that kind of cycle of existence. No. So we will stop there for today. Went a little extra today, so we got something a little extra.
Thank you for walking us through the 12 links this morning, Ginla. And Katrina, thank you for your beautiful translations. For those who are watching online, we hope you'll join us again next Monday at 8 a.m. Pacific. We'll finish with some dedications.
May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and all spiritual friends who practice it, have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Losang's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore.
Oh yeah, tuchena Geshe la, kiana da dunja jema jeong.
Recording stop.
Understood.